going to be a walkthrough for the practice for chapter 1. So here we have problem 1, and as you can see, I take the information directly from the book and then I put it into an Excel so that I can reference these numbers. So question 1, Martinez Company's relevant range of production is 7,500 units to 12,500 units. When it produces and sells 10,000 units, its average cost per unit are as follows. So that means when they made this chart, they divided the total by 10,000 units. And that's going to be important when I need to figure out my total fixed cost later. So for financial accounting purposes, what is the total amount of product costs incurred to make 10,000 units? So remember, product costs are raw materials purchases, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So my direct materials per unit is 7. Direct labor is 450. Variable manufacturing overhead is $1.40. So my variable per unit would be the sum of those numbers. Now the number of units that I'm producing was 10,000. So I'm going to equals 10,000. So my total variable then would simply be the total variable times the number of units produced. Now I need to figure out my fixed manufacturing overhead because that's still a part of this, right? Manufacturing overhead is still a part of a product cost. So the per unit was $4. No, the fixed right there, $4 for fixed manufacturing overhead. And now it's a little confusing because they made the same number, 10,000 is how many I'm producing in this problem, is the same number that they used to make this chart. So I'm making 10,000 was how many units that they used when they made these variable costs. So now I can say that my total fixed cost is going to be the $4 times that 10,000 units for $40,000. Now, you're going to find that throughout this problem, there are going to be problems where this total fixed manufacturing cost, this will stay the same no matter how many units I produce and sell. The variable cost, the total variable cost will change when the number of units changes that I produce and sell. But for this problem, I just need to add my variable manufacturing cost plus my fixed gives me my total product cost of $159,000, which that's my answer right there. So the other thing in these problems, it's the same information on this chart. And then down in the question, they will ask us different things and sometimes change the numbers on us. So keep an eye on that. But essentially, the base information will stay the same all the way through question 15. So the question is, for financial accounting purposes, what is the total amount of period cost incurred to make 10,000 units? Okay, so period costs are selling and administrative. So my total period cost per unit are the $4 and the $2.10 because I'm not worried about selling. What did I do there? I don't know what I did there. Ignore that. Whoa. Okay, so sales commissions is $1.10 and the variable administrative is 55 cents. So my variable cost, my variable selling and admin per unit are going to be those two added together. And then I'm doing 10,000 units again. And again, that's the number they use to make this chart. So that'll be important when I get to my fixed. Okay, so my total variable is going to be equal to $1.65 times 10,000. Okay, now I need to figure out my fixed totals. So average fixed, selling and admin. It's going to be, apparently I put those together. That was silly. So the $4 plus the 210. And again, the number of units sold, that are the number of units that they use to make this chart is that 10,000 still. So I'm going to do the 610 times the 10,000 for 61,000. And then I just need to add my variable plus my fixed equals my total period, or in other words, not manufacturing costs of 77,500. So again, this includes sales commissions, variable admin, fixed selling, and fixed administrative are all included in this period cost. Okay, question 3. If 8,000 units are produced and sold, what is the variable cost per unit produced and sold? So again, the per unit when it's variable stays the same, but the total changes. So this is asking for variable per unit. And they are saying produced and sold. Okay, so that's going to be my direct material. Whoops. Sorry, equals my direct material plus direct labor plus variable manufacturing overhead. So those are variable costs. So those are in production, and now I need my selling expenses that are variable. So that would be sales commissions plus administrative. So my total variable cost per unit sold, so produced and sold, is $14.55. And again, that included the production variable cost and the selling and administrative variable cost. We're just looking at variable, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it's nice that they told me that they're doing 8,000 units, but variable per unit costs stay the same, but the total changes by how many units. And they wanted per unit, so that's what it is $14.55. So now question 4, same thing. If 12,500 units are produced and sold, what is the variable cost per unit, right? Not total, per unit produced and sold. So again, that's going to be my direct materials, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead, sales commissions, and variable and administrative expense. Because it's produced and sold, so it's selling and administrative and production, and it's just the variable. And again, the per unit stays the same. The total will change when I multiply it by the different number of units, but they're not asking me for a total, they're asking me for a per unit. So it's the same as answer as question 3. Okay, question 5. If 8,000 units are produced and sold, what is the total amount of variable costs related to the units produced and sold? Sorry about the typo. Okay, so now they want the total variable. So again, in those previous 2 questions, I figured out that my variable expenses for production and selling consist of those 5 numbers. So there's my per unit variable cost. And they're telling me 8,000 units. So I'm going to take the variable cost per unit times the number of units. So my total variable cost then for 8,000 units is going to be 116,400. Now, question 6, if 12,500 units, so are produced and sold, what is the total amount of variable costs related to the units produced and sold? So again, that's going to be my variable cost per unit times the number of units. So the total variable cost, as you can see, changed. That's the definition of a variable cost. The total changes when the units change. Is 181,875. So you can see from question 5 and question 6, when the units change, the total variable cost changes, but the per unit stayed the same. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears in question 7, and they say if 8,000 units are produced, okay, just produced, what is the average fixed manufacturing cost per unit produced? So average fixed manufacturing cost per unit produced if 8,000 units are produced. So first of all, this is where this 10,000 units comes into play. They used the 10,000 units to figure out these per unit fixed costs. And I'm just dealing with fixed manufacturing overhead because I'm just looking at the fixed cost for production. So I'm not looking at the selling or administrative, just the manufacturing. So I need to get back to what is my total fixed manufacturing overhead. And that's going to be the $4 times the 10,000 units that they used when they made this chart of per unit cost. So this is my total fixed manufacturing overhead. This will remain the same because it is a fixed cost, and the definition of a fixed cost is that the total stays the same no matter how many units are produced and sold. On the other hand, if I'm spreading this out, this $40,000 across a certain number of units, the per unit fixed cost will change depending on how many units I'm spreading this total amount across to cover. So 8,000 units are produced. What is the average fixed manufacturing cost per unit produced? So to find that, I will take that $40,000. So pretend like this is rent on the building I'm producing in. So my rent every month is $40,000. Now I made 8,000 units. So I'm going to divide that number by 8,000 units to see that I can assign $5 per unit of fixed cost to help cover my rent. Now in question 8, it changed. 12,500 units are produced. What is the average fixed manufacturing cost per unit produced? So again, my fixed manufacturing overhead cost is going to be $4 times the 10,000 units they used to make this chart. So I have my $40,000 fixed manufacturing cost. The units produced are 12,500. So my average fixed manufacturing cost per unit would then be $40,000 divided by 12,500 units. So now my per unit fixed manufacturing cost is only $3.20 because I have more units to spread this total fixed cost over that are helping pay for this cost. Okay, question 9. If 8,000 units are produced, what is the total amount of fixed manufacturing cost incurred to support this level of production? So now they're asking me for my total fixed manufacturing cost. So again, I got this number by multiplying the $4 by the 10,000 units that they used to make this chart. And that is my total fixed manufacturing cost. It does not matter that I only made 8,000 units. My total is still going to be $40,000. Question 10. If 12,500 units are produced, what is the total amount of fixed manufacturing cost incurred to support this level of production? Again, the $40,000 is the 10,000 units that they used to make the chart times the, times the fixed manufacturing overhead. Sorry about that. Still $40,000, luckily. And that is my total fixed manufacturing expense. No matter how many units I produce and sell, that total fixed will remain the same. Okay, question 11. Okay, if 8,000 units are produced, what is the total amount of manufacturing overhead and costs incurred to support this level of production? What is the total amount expressed on a per unit basis? Okay, so here's my 8,000 units. So in order to find my total manufacturing overhead costs, I need to figure out what my variable manufacturing overhead is. So variable would be the $1.40 times the 8,000 units that were produced. And then to get the total manufacturing overhead cost, I would take the variable total plus the fixed to equal $51,200 total manufacturing overhead cost. And then they want the average the per unit for this total would be equal to the 51,200 divided by 8,000 units, so $6.40. So you're just taking the total and divide it by the number of units you produce and sell to find out the per unit. I could also, yeah, we'll just do it that way. Okay, question 12. If 12,500 units are produced, what is the total amount of manufacturing overhead incurred to support this level of production? So again, there's my 12,500 units. I need to find out my variable, so that's going to be the $1.40 times 12,500 units. And then to get the total, I add the variable plus the fixed. And then to figure out it on a per unit basis, I will take that total divided by the number of units to come up with $4.60. So you can see on this, the fixed total stays the same, the variable changes. And because this is a mixed cost and has fixed and variable, we see that it changes. You know, if I have less units to spread the fixed across, then my per unit goes up. If I have more units to pay for this $40,000, then my per unit is less. All right. Question 13. If the selling price is $23 per unit, what is the contribution margin per unit? Well, my variable expenses per unit, if you'll recall from a previous problem, is the direct materials, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead, sales commission, and variable administrative expense. Those are my variable expenses for production and selling of each unit. So my variable expenses are $14.55, and I just simply subtract selling price minus variable equals contribution margin. So my contribution margin per unit is $8.45. And the contribution margin is what it can go contribute to paying the fixed expenses. Okay, question 14. If 12,000 units are produced, what are the total amounts of direct and indirect manufacturing costs incurred to support this level of production? Okay, so first things first, remember that my total fixed manufacturing overhead is still $40,000. It's still that 10,000 times the $4. Okay, so I've got to figure out my direct, 12,000 units. So my direct cost is going to be equal to direct materials plus direct labor. And we're just talking about production. So I'm not worried about selling or administrative. I'm just talking about production. So it's just these four top ones. And variable manufacturing overhead is an indirect cost. And so is fixed manufacturing overhead. Okay, so I'm going to close the parentheses and then multiply that by 12,000 units. So direct materials plus direct labor times the number of units will give me my total direct manufacturing. And then my indirect, first I need to open parentheses. Indirect is variable manufacturing overhead times the number of units. So that gives me my variable. And then I need to add my fixed total. So there's my direct manufacturing cost and there's my indirect manufacturing cost. So and remember, I got this number by multiplying that 10,000 units that they use to create this chart times the per unit fixed manufacturing overhead. Question 15. What incremental manufacturing cost will Martinez incur if it increases production from 10,000 to 10,001 units? So the incremental for one more unit would be equal to 1 unit of direct materials plus 1 unit of direct labor plus 1 unit of variable manufacturing overhead. So that's what they mean by incremental manufacturing costs. It's the costs that go up 1 unit at a time. So just by increasing 1 unit, my extra cost or incremental manufacturing cost will just be the 1 unit's worth of direct materials, direct labor, and the variable manufacturing overhead. So it'll be $12.90. Good luck.